Hi everybody, welcome to class with Professor Mead. Today we're going to talk about the article by Lorena Garcia, and this article is titled "This is Your Job Now: Latina Mothers and Daughters and Family Work." So before we start, Garcia cautions us against interpreting behaviors and attitudes that we find from research in the Latina community as being derived solely from culture. Whenever we do this to any type of group, we are homogenizing a diverse group, right? So consider some things, right? Working poor is somebody who works 40 hours a week at paid jobs, but still lives in poverty. And many people in the United States today have two full-time workers in the household, and they're still living in poverty. And then the feminization of poverty is that women of all races tend to be more precariously paid and have more poorly paid jobs. But Hispanic women fall at the bottom of that, as we learned in one of our previous articles. So our Think, Pair, Share for today, I'll give you a second to write down the answers and see what you know prior to the lecture. So for this article today that we're reading, let's start with talking about the methodology that they use. Your article starts on page 411, and within the first couple pages, the author, the sociologist here, gives you their methods. They tell you how they're collecting their data through interviews and ethnographic fieldwork. Ethnographic fieldwork is when you go and participate within a community or live within a community and collect data as you're in that community. And she also tells you the population that she's working with, second generation Latina girls and their mothers. And it's important to note that because sometimes when we read ethnographic research, if we're not familiar with it, we can forget that this is actually based on research on the rules of the scientific method, just like any other type of maybe quantitative research that you might find. So in her introduction, she talks a little bit, she gives you kind of a background story of a few people that she's interviewing. And then she talks about something that academics have kind of missed. And that's that when academics do research on gendered labor and how it's separated in the home, a lot of times they're doing it from a middle class white perspective. And so they don't consider the children, how they're divided into the labor. Whereas in a lot of families across cultures, the children are very much integrated into the daily living of the family. And this is also the case for Latino mothers and daughters. And then another concept that you need to understand is something you probably heard before, the second shift. It's any additional unpaid labor that is done by you or a family member after you go to work or you go to school. That's your second shift. And they even talk about a third shift now, but we won't get into that. In Hispanic culture, or in all culture really, there's a lot of ideological barriers to recognizing the second shift is actually a form of labor. We don't value certain types of labor. It's just something that is done. It's not something, because it's not something that's paid, it may not be seen as work. If it is seen as work, it's not seen as valuable work that needs to be done, taking care of children and family and house and that kind of thing. This is propagated through our media, within our institutions, through our family. It's just how we're socialized. And so we often don't see it as a form of labor, which it is. In the case of the Latina mothers and daughters, and something that they find that the Latina daughters, the girls, juggle the demands of work, school, and domestic work. As a matter of fact, they often can miss out on school or other things that they need to do, or extracurricular activities, because of the devotion to family that is expected, specifically within the Latinx community. This is also the case, though, for most Asian families as well. You see a sense of what we call familialism, and that's the responsibility as a child, especially a daughter, that you have to care for and participate in the well-being of the family, doing domestic labor, doing what we call emotion work, and doing gendered labor. Familialism. I would recommend trying to say that out loud. So gender divisions continue as a theme as Garcia starts to talk about protecting daughters and mothers' responsibility in the section of It's What Mothers Do. This concept comes up of, for instance, a daughter's sexual behavior being somehow a reflection of a mother's ability to be a good mother. And it ties together with the ideologies and value of familialism, where the daughters have responsibilities to the mothers and the family, and the mothers have a similar sense of responsibility to the daughters, protecting the daughters' sexuality and behavior and keeping them reined in. So this idea of it being the mother's responsibility is what we call a cult of domesticity. So it comes out of this those 1950s, 60s traditional archetype gender roles. And it's a concept where women are supposed to be perfectly devoted mothers and wives and should be able to make a home, a heaven on earth for men and children. So that gets tangled in and merged with other types of values and the economic realities that people face today. Because in almost all of these different interviews, the mothers all saw themselves as legitimate economic providers. And like most immigrants, even if the family played the traditional gender roles, the breadwinner father and the homemaker mother, in the country of origin, when people immigrate, they tend to find themselves in an economic situation where both of them need to work. And so they both become legitimate economic providers. And it's the daughters specifically, but children in general, who then become more responsible for maintaining the ongoing labor that goes on, the repetitive labor that goes on in the household, so that the household can keep functioning. At the same time, the mothers are trying to, raise their daughters as modern daughters and modern children into modern women. And so they will, for the girls, try to push them into having more economic independence, while at the same time still expecting them to play the role of caregivers for boys, because boys are still being raised to be domestically dependent on women, but girls are being raised to be both domestically independent and economically independent. So it creates this kind of double bind situation. But for all children, the parents are hoping for upward mobility. They don't want them in the same situation where they have to take jobs for the economic reason, but that they can take jobs or careers that they want. And from this strong sense of familialism is this idea that everybody has a role to play and everybody has to make sacrifices. And so what happens is, if, like, say, a daughter becomes sexually active or stays out late at night, or even is, out doing extracurricular activities, it's not the father who is ridiculed or blamed, but in our society is the mother who's blamed. And we do this across the board too, what we call mother blaming, right? So because you're expected to be the primary caretaker of children, this also means that you're the one that's primarily responsible when things go wrong. And in the article, they talk about a mom warning her daughter not to act like or behave like the white girls, meaning that the white girls have much more freedom of movement to do what they want, right? They can go out and enjoy an adolescence that is more free instead of an adolescence where there's more responsibilities at home. And this is a form of protecting daughters in the Latinx community, is to restrict them from going outside the home, because there's an idea of a good girl, bad girl dichotomy, which means that if women don't limit themselves sexually, they're not worthy of respect. That if women have sex sometimes once or with too many partners, that they are the bad girl, whereas men don't face the same double standard. In addition to that, that familialism expectation that everybody makes sacrifices also means that mothers are expected to forego leisure time and daughters are expected to forego extracurricular activities. And that is the sacrifice made for the family. In addition to that, daughters do also provide a very high level of what we call emotion work. And that means that they're partially responsible for sustaining the family's emotional well-being. So don't cause problems that would make the family upset. Don't ask for things that would cause turmoil. Also, if another family member, like a younger child, is upset or throwing a tantrum, you should stay calm and remain emotionally supportive to that family member. That's the concept of doing emotion work. It's done all the time. We do it all the time. We do it at home. We especially do it with little kids, right? Think of a tantrum, how you can't throw a tantrum just because a baby throws a tantrum. Or when you're at work and you're providing a service to somebody, they can throw a fit and be yelling and screaming, but you still have to maintain your calm. That's emotion work. And so that happens both inside and outside the home, but it's primarily that responsibility is placed on female members within a household, especially within a Latinx community. So what is happening today with the girls that she's interviewing, that's changed a little bit, is that second generation Latina girls will play that good girl strategy in an attempt to maintain some of their freedom. So if they are the good girl, if you're not afraid that you're gonna, your daughter's gonna go out and do something she shouldn't do, then she can play sports or have an extracurricular activity, or every once in a while, spend the night at a cousin's house or something like that. And the girls, several of the girls in this article report how they confront their brothers, right? So we're constantly negotiating things like gender roles or society's expectation. And so every interaction you have is another negotiation of those rules within your family, within a group, and then within society. And so these girls, you could tell they're constantly confronting their brothers for their male privilege. One of them, got in a fight with her brother who was 19, and she didn't want to fold his clothes even though she was doing his laundry. So they would say these things, right, to their brothers and to their parents. Sometimes they would get scolded from their parents, and sometimes they would be able to, change the expectation of the labor. And so they were actively engaging in and confronting the male privilege within their family. Okay, here's your discussion study guide. What do you now know? Do you know these different concepts? And how has the lecture contributed to your learning? And the next slide is your reading comprehension.